canvas painting project. This is where we're going to learn to paint it. And for this bit, you're going to need to get out your acrylic painting kit. That means that you're going to need some paintbrushes. And if you bought your kit through Artshed, you'll find you already have pots of pre-mixed colours ready to use. If you don't, you're very welcome to check out our kit list, and on there you'll have a list of all the colours that you need for this project. You will notice throughout the project that I demonstrate quite a lot with a flat brush. So if you have one of those, it'd be great to get it out and use it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to paint our picture's underpants. Now that might sound really strange if you've never been to Artshed before. If you imagine when you wake up in the morning, you might put on your underwear, your t-shirt, some trousers, maybe a jumper, maybe even a coat, and it's exactly the same with painting. We're going to be painting in layers, and between each layer you might have to go away and have a break and wait for it to dry before you can paint the next one. So I want you to have a really good look now at all the colours in this painting. And I want you to see if you can guess what colour this painting's underpants are. To give you a clue, have a look around the edges of the trees and the bushes. Underneath this whole painting, I've painted bright yellow. I wonder if you guessed that. The reason we do that is because it depends what sort of feeling or atmosphere that you want for your picture. If I'd left it white is very bright, and you would have, if I hadn't quite finished, you'd see lots of white poking through my picture, and often that can kind of look like you haven't finished. Whereas if it's a different colour, that colour is there to actually add some sparkle to the picture. And I wanted this picture, it's springtime, it's warm, it's happy, my ducks are happy. And so I chose a colour that I think represents all those things. And yellow is a great colour, it's the colour of sunshine, it's warm. And so that's why we do underpants on our painting. So let's get on and do our underpants. So to put on the painting's underpants, you're going to need probably the biggest brush that you've got and a pot of runny yellow paint. Then all we do is we paint the whole picture bright yellow. You don't need to do it neatly, just go over any big runny lumps, and then you're going to need to go away and let this dry before we can do the next bit. So our underpants are nice and dry. We're ready to paint. So if you remember, we said that we were going to do this picture in layers. So the first thing we're going to do is put a layer on our ducks. We've got to get them white again. We're going to be putting more layers on later on. This is just the first one. I'm using a flat brush because I actually find that you can get quite nice edges with a flat brush, if you see there. Now this doesn't have to be very neat because we're going to be painting on top of this later on. This is just layer number one. can see I'm still using a big brush for my little duck because I actually find that the corners of the big brush can get into all those little bits quite easily. So I haven't had to change to a small brush. So I've painted that quite loosely. You can still see bits of the underpants poking through. So don't give it a really thick layer. We want that to dry. So we want our ducks to start to look a bit 3D. That means I want them to come out at you. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a couple more colours on our ducks. I'm just going to give my paintbrush a little wash. And I'm going to pick up this nice warm yellowy colour. And I'm going to paint a little bit, quite loosely, just in stripes. You see that? Just in sort of patches. On the part of the duck that I want to sort of come out at you. Okay, so the duck's tummy. Now again, it doesn't have to be too neat because we are going to be doing another layer of white on top of all this, which might all seem a bit strange. Okay, there we go. A little bit on his neck. Okay, that's probably enough for that duck. Don't do the very edges, just the middle, the bit, you know, the duck's tummy where it sticks out. There we go. Again, I would use your flat brush for this bit. Make sure it's just patches. You don't want a solid colour on there. Maybe put a little bit on his neck. Let's do this fella as well. So I'm going to give my brush another wash. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put the shadow on our duck. Now in my picture, the light is coming from this way. That means that this side of my duck, the right-hand side, is going to have the shadow on it. Now shadows are always cold colours. Blues and purples. So I'm going to use light blue, just like that. And just on the side of my ducks, again in patches, you can still keep the same brush, still use the same flat brush. And we're going to paint on the side of your duck. Now that might look really strange, but don't forget, we're painting in layers, and later on we're going to go over this bit again in white. This is kind of another, it's kind of like the t-shirt under the jumper. Now try not to mix it with this colour there. You'll probably find if you do that, it'll start to go green. It's yellow and blue. Right, I think that's plenty. So I'm going to put my blue away. I'm going to rinse my brush. And we're actually going to go back to our white. Make sure your brush is really, really clean. Don't want the blue to contaminate the white. And this time we're going to go and look at the puddles. Now we're just going to put the white on the edge of our puddles. I'm going to talk about how to make water look a little bit like water, even if it's just simple like this painting. It's just round the edge. This is where our puddle is kind of really shiny. always put some more white on later. Let's do the same around this puddle. I chose a turquoisey colour for my distant sky. I know that's not necessarily the colour of sky, but I really liked this colour. You can obviously choose to do a different colour, but... So I'm now going to paint in between my trees. So don't forget, it's okay. Remember, we've done these yellow underpants for a purpose. It's okay if you leave little yellow bits around the edges of the trees. It doesn't have to be really neatly painted. In fact, sometimes it's nicer if it's not. So I'm going to talk about putting the colours in the puddle. Now, water always reflects everything around it. And we're going to keep it simple today. We're just going to get the water to reflect the sky. Now I'm going to imagine, because I haven't painted the sky as it gets higher up, that my sky is going to go from turquoise, and as it gets higher up, it's actually going to go blue. So I'm going to reflect that in my puddle. So I'm going to have my puddle going from turquoise to blue. And that will make it look a little bit like it's reflecting the sky. So I'm going to put my turquoise on. Don't worry too much if you get colours on their feet, because we're going to go over that later. Also, don't forget you can leave little yellow bits. I'm still using the same brush that I've used for the whole painting so far. When I paint, I do mostly use a flat brush. Okay, so you can put some patches in there. Try and keep those edges curved. Okay, so that's the back of our puddle. We've got to do the back of this guy's puddle as well. It's a little bit more tricky. There we go. I've lost the white edge at the back. I can always put that back on later. Always go back. That's the lovely thing about painting. So once it's dry, any mistakes you make, once it's dry, you can go over it again. I will probably neaten that up a little bit later on, but I'm going to wash my brush and get that light blue. On the bottom. So here's my blue. So remember, this is what I'm imagining the sky to be up further, up higher rather. Okay. I'm going to blend that a little bit. Can you see? Now, because I'm painting from the side, which is not what I normally would do, but just to show you, so I will probably have to tidy this up a little bit when I look at it from the right angle. then let's do this guy's here. So we've got our first layer of paint on, and we're now going to put the first layer on our field. Again, we're going to need that to dry before we can put the other layer on. So I've got a dark brown, and I'm going to use this. If you imagine that under the soil you've got the kind of wet, cloggy earth, and that's going to be kind of dark, a dark colour. So again, I'm only painting in patches. Can you see I'm leaving quite a lot of yellow? And I'm going to go around the edge of the field, just partly because I want to give it some definition. Go around the duck's head. Got to remember that paintings, they can look funny for quite a long time. And sometimes it's hard to imagine that you're only going to get to something that looks good at the end, but I want you to trust me that this will look really good by the time you've finished. Again, keep your brush strokes really loose. And I'm still using my flat brush. I'm also going to go around the edge of my puddles, because when the soil gets wet, it goes a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go around the edges of my puddles. I'm not being really neat here. I'm leaving flashes of underpants poking through, because that's what's going to give our painting the sparkle when we're finished. The main thing is that you make sure you leave plenty bits of yellow. Okay, do not want it to go, everything becomes solid and brown. So we're going to let that brown dry a little bit before we put the next layer on, and we will start to work a little bit here on the trees and the bushes. So to paint the background, we're going to keep our colours nice and cool. Cool colours go away from you. If you were to use bright red and bright pinks in this background, it would kind of dominate a little bit. When we want the ducks to be the main feature here. So I'm going to keep my background in blues and purples. Now, I know that trees aren't blue, but again, that's the beauty of painting and art. You can really do anything, any colour, but so that's good enough for now. I will probably go and neaten those up a little bit in parts, bits, have a check for bits that I've missed. And I'll probably put a bit more sky colour back in later on. So we're going to move on to the bushes. Now again, keep to your purples and blues. Now this time I'm going to change my brush, got a bit of paint on me there, to a round one. Can you see? That's a round brush. That's really good for round shapes. You could do this with a flat brush, but it's going to be a bit easier. So I'm going to start with some dark purple. I might do this bush in the front. Dark purple. You don't have to copy exactly the colours I'm using for the background. Just make sure they're cold colours. So cold colours are greens, purple, blue. Warm colours are reds, oranges, pinks. And later on we're going to be putting blossom coming down, and so we want to make sure that that looks like it's in the foreground. So I'm not going to put pink in my bushes. Okay, I'm happy with that so far. So I'm going to let this dry a little bit, and we're going to move on and do the next layers. So I just spent a little bit of time tidying up my trees and my sky. I put another layer on both of them because I want them to be a little bit more solid. My bushes I'm happy with at the moment. I might do a bit to them later on. I also just tidied up my puddle a little bit, and I put a little bit more of that pale colour back on top of the turquoise colour, back on top of the blue. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do another layer on our field, on our muddy field. And again, this could feel quite strange because we're going to put on some dark grey. So if you imagine this time we painted clumps of mud. This time you're going to think a little bit more about maybe large boulders or some stones. Okay, so using this, we're just going to do the same thing with this dark grey. And again, make sure you don't cover everything up. Just put in, back with your flat brush again. You're going to put in some sort of stony shapes. Now these shapes are going to be smaller, so actually what you could do in the background is use your brush this way, can you see? And then as you come forward, they could get bigger like that. See, there's a bigger mark there, and as I come forward here, it's even bigger. That will help give it some perspective. I think I've got enough rocks now in my field. That's going to need to dry, and then we're going to do another layer and bring our ducks out a bit. So before we put the white back on the ducks, let's get their beak and feet in. And you'll notice as soon as we start to put these lovely warm colours on, your picture is going to start to come alive. Make sure you have a really clean brush for this bit. I've just washed this one, so I'm hoping it's clean enough. And now you can use a smaller round brush, and you can do that to put in your beaks. Now to paint this branch, you might think I need my tiny little paintbrush, but actually I've gone back to my flat brush because I can get nice straight lines with that brush. So with the dark brown that you used for your field, I'm going to start putting stripes of this colour on the tree. Now this is where I could go slightly wrong, because painting this as an angle is quite tricky. So you can see I'm using my flat brush on its side. It's actually a lot easier that way to paint thin straight lines like this. So I'm going to put some highlights on my branch with the pale yellow ochre colour. Again, if you remember, I was saying the light is coming from this side, so I'm going to imagine the light hitting this branch. So particularly here, that probably means that on this side of my branch, it's going to be paler. Now I'm going to want to neaten this up later on, but for now, you'll get the idea. Once you get to the branch at the top, I wouldn't worry too much, because the light will be hitting them from all over the place. So now we need to get our ducks back again. We need to get them white again. And this is still going to be wet, so we don't want to touch our field. That's got to be completely dry until we do the final layer of that. So while we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to go back to our white. Our ducks should be nice and dry now. This is where we start to neaten our painting back up again. So we're going to get our ducks really nice and white. So I'm back with my flat paintbrush. It is completely clean. Really important that when you go back to white, your paintbrush is perfectly clean and your ducks are completely dry, because we want a really bright white colour now. So on this side of my duck, he's going to be almost completely smooth, where the sun is hitting the side of his body. So we don't have any shadow in it, just really bright white. All the way down the side of your duck. Don't be tempted to smooth it all the way across, because then you'll lose the effect of what we did earlier on, even though it's tempting. So I'm going to do that with all my ducks. Remember, just on this side, the opposite side to the blue side, which was our shadow. It's amazing that they've stayed so clean in this muddy field. We actually have a duck in our garden, and I'm always amazed how clean the white duck stays, even though they live in, they're very, very messy creatures. So I've got the nice smooth white on that side. So now I'm going to go travel over my duck. And this time, I really want you to be careful that you don't cover everything underneath, and we're going to use what's called dry brush. So you put a bit of wet paint on there, do it in patches on this bit here, and then as the paint comes off your brush in that bit, you can move it along, and can you see that it starts to leave a kind of see-through stroke, because I haven't got loads of paint on my duck, so I'm kind of leaving a haze over the, can you see that, over the top. Go right to the other side, but it's not a solid colour. I haven't got a lot of paint on my brush, and this is called dry brush, where you're dragging a brush that has a bit of paint on it. So if I want to get more paint on my brush, I'm going to start on this side, because I don't want loads of paint on the other side, and then as more paint comes off my brush, I'm going to travel across, right across to the shadow side. So start the new paint, start on your smooth side, and then right across. So I'm happy with that for now. I'm going to look at it again later on. While I've got the white, I might tidy up my puddle. I'm happy with this bit here. I'm just not so happy just there. There's some marks there that I don't think help my puddle look like a puddle. So I'm going to smooth that out there. Just make sure it's curved. Okay, there we go. Same with this puddle here. I'm just going to give the puddle a nice smooth edge to it. And this guy, he's lost the reflection of the back there. So I'm just going to put that back in. So check that this bit is completely dry before we do the next bit. Especially these dark bits here, you really don't want any of those to be wet. So now we're going to put a layer, the final layer, on our field. For that we're going to need our pale yellow ochre colour, same colour that we used on the ducks and on the branch there. And this time we're going to put this across our whole field, but again, really carefully make sure you don't make it really solid and cover up everything that you did before, a little bit like we did with the ducks. So here I go. So what you can see to go around the ducks is that I actually take my paintbrush to the edge of the duck, put it down and then flick away. That's a better way than flicking towards your duck, because then you'll end up with the paint on the duck instead. This bit is a little bit more fiddly, but that's because we're getting towards the end of the painting, where you want to be a little bit more careful now. So once you've done your first layer, have a look, see if you like it. For me, I think I've got a bit too much poking through there. So I'm probably going to put some more on the background, because actually to get it to look like the field is going further away, the chances are all these little marks are going to be smaller. So it's easy to imagine, for example, let's say some of these little marks here are stones. Okay, but if those were in the foreground, they'd be bigger, wouldn't they? So you can tell by some of these marks that actually they're nearer to you because they're bigger. And that's the kind of impression we want to give. When you're an artist, you're kind of a magician. What you're trying to do is you're trying to create an illusion. So you kind of learn tricks that mean that when someone looks at a flat picture, they see something that's not flat, that's sort of 3D. We've only got a couple more things to do. We're going to let this dry. We're going to do our blossom. We're going to put the eyes on our ducks. And if you remember, we're going to do the water on their feet as well. So a couple of things I did while you weren't looking is you can probably see I've put the eyes in my ducks with the grey paint that I had. You could either use the end of a paintbrush, dip it in the paint and do it on there. You could always use a Sharpie if you wanted to, but paint's nice. I also did another layer of orange on my beak and my feet. And then also what I did, which is what we talked about earlier, was I used a bit of the watercolour, some of the blue, and I painted over, just in kind of straight lines, a little bit like making ripples. I painted over the bottom of their feet, just so that it kind of looked a little bit more like they were standing in the puddle and not on top of the puddle. So I'm happy with this now. And the last bit that I want to do is the blossom. So for that, you're going to need your lovely pink paint. You could have a mixture of pinks. I've just got this one for now. And also, you could use one of these ear cleaner thingies. I've forgotten what they're called. So you can dip them in here, dip one in here, and then start creating your blossom. Now, blossom does grow in clumps. You'll notice if you have a good look. So when you put it on, imagine it falling down a branch. We're not going to bother painting the branch in. And every now and then overlap your dots. So you've got kind of like a clump. Especially near the branches where you're going to have more clumps near the branches, and then as they fall down towards the end of your imaginary branch, there's less and less of them, and then you end up with little dots like this. So you can put on as many blossom as you like. I wonder if you can tell now why it's really important that we didn't paint our bushes and our trees pink or red or any bright colours, because I think putting this blossom on really makes it come forward. And then the very last bit, we can start making it snow all over your picture, where the bits of blossom are falling on the falling from there, so it must be a bit of a windy day. Don't forget it's going to fall down to the ground. Maybe gather in some clumps around the edges of the puddle. You might have one or two bits that have landed in the puddle. So you can put on as much blossom as you like. But there we have it. There's our Puddle Ducks canvas painting project. I hope you enjoyed doing your Puddle Ducks canvas painting project at home. I'd love to see what you've done, so please share your pictures with us on Artshed's Facebook page. And if you enjoyed doing this, do check out our other projects. If you particularly like ducks, we have this duck run watercolour project ready for you to trial at home. It's slightly different, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it just as much.